given out for my clients who spiritual is kind of a weird word for them, and so I use the inspirational or spiritual, and so
Yeah.
that tends to resonate with some, while spiritual resonates with others, and so we were just talking about kind of how going into like our political season and identity politics and labels and buckets that we get put in and things like that. So I don't want to interrupt too much of the conversation because you guys were kind of going, but we are recording and we should probably let people know who we're talking to.
Yeah.
So you were bringing up that you came from a highly political, highly conservative, religious upbringing. So let's just dive back into that conversation.
Yeah. It's funny because when people are like, you came from a high religious, I guess being in this field and like really like kind of nerding out on stuff like this, there are so many people who came from way higher, stricter religious settings. I grew up Methodist. So in the terms of, I didn't grow up evangelical. I had a bout with my own like exploring evangelicalism. But like I didn't grow up in a cult. I mean, Methodism for the most part has a pretty liberal arm to it. But I grew up in the South, the deep red. My grandfather was and is a politician, and so I grew up in an environment where like there was strict understanding about human rights and what the bounds were on that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that definitely shaped, I think, who I am for sure.
And so when we talk about a spiritual or inspirational domain, the starting question for defining values is, how do you want to experience yourself spiritually? Or how do you want to experience yourself as one who is inspired? Whichever question comes into play. But then I was thinking about this the other day. I think with like relational and romantic, and especially, if you have a kind of a moral or spiritual code that you live by, I think there's an element of how do you want other people to experience you as well? Because that also plays into a lot of times, whatever your spiritual definition is of how you live that out. So kind of start there. Can you answer those questions for me?
That's a really good place to start, because I actually think like spiritual values in general, right, are, if I believe this about myself inherently, like for me as someone, I would say like who admires, is inspired by the teachings of Jesus and lots of other people, right? So I think I would still, through all of my faith untangling, call myself a Christian, right? And if I believe in this idea of like imago Dei, made in the image of God, if I am, then so is everyone else. So yes, if I believe this about myself, then I have to believe it about other people, which absolutely shapes then like how those values are lived out, projected out into the world. Which takes us back to that liberal conversation, right? That if everyone is made in the image of God, then it's not on me to like put bounds on that. Anyway, that's a separate conversation, but it's funny because when maybe I stole this from you as we talked about domains very early on, but I talk about when I'm walking through domains with my clients, I talk about as sort of your values, like XY axis, like your values are here and your behaviors are here. And so if you come in, for instance, and we're going through like the physical domain, and we're talking about one of the things you say, which is a really silly example, but they say like, I'm a vegan, like it's really important to me, like animal rights is huge to me, right? And then we get down the line and you come in and kind of in passing, you disclose that you've been like eating chicken wings for 3 weeks, right? And like your behavior is not aligning with your value system, right?
Right.
And so we're able to say, okay, well, if that's off track, what we know is that probably the rest of your value systems are out of alignment. And so either the behavior needs to change, right? Or the your values need to change. And what I find with my clients and probably in my own life, is values are far less likely to change than it's probably the behavior that needs adjusting, right? Yeah. But spiritually for me, I mean, like I've had a shift in like what once was like has been readjusted. Like I actually needed to change here because the behavior indicated to me that my values were no longer like what they used to be.
Right. And I think a lot of those values, especially spiritually. So like kids who grow up in a home with really active, fit, like health-minded, wellness-minded parents, like they're going to inherit some of that, right?
Yeah.
Same spiritually.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And the thing about it is like we know that there are some like objectively healthy behaviors. There's objectively healthy diets. There's like walking is good for you, aerobic exercise is good for you, weightlifting is good for you. But when you get into like the spiritual, inspirational, the stuff that you inherit isn't so objectively good or bad. Like it's definitely a spectrum. And so I know that growing up in my upbringing as a evangelical general Baptist, which was very fundamental in its teaching and very rigid and boxed into like, we are right and everyone outside of us is wrong, which is very cultish. And so that value system of picking it up as you come along, and then later in life, meeting people, having the ability to travel, having the ability to read what other beliefs, and you're just like,
wait a second,
there's some value in this.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about when did those kind of shifts and switchbacks start happening for you?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Like when you're younger, the physical stuff is gonna, I'm gonna eat healthy. I'm gonna be an intuitive eater. I'm gonna value my fitness, right? But from a spiritual perspective, it informs so much, like the way that your parents discipline you, right? Like the routines that you set, what's allowed and not allowed, who is allowed and not allowed. And that certainly shifted for me. My parents in general, my mom especially, like pretty progressive person. So I always had the ability, also should note that I think this definitely plays a part in it, but like highly educated parents, right? So they allowed me to like form my own opinions. But it wasn't until I stepped outside of my red Southern experience and started meeting people that weren't like me, didn't talk like me, didn't look like me, didn't worship like me, that I was like, oh, there's other stuff. Like there's other stuff out here. And that sort of rocked my world. And that like, I thought I had all the answers, and it made me realize like, yeah, I don't know anything. Like, I don't know anything.
That's the thing that I miss the most about being an evangelical Christian is the bliss of certainty.
Yeah.
Of thinking that like I have the answers and I don't need to worry about a thing. Yep. As long as I have these answers. And the shift for me started probably back in like 2012, 2013, around the time that I met my friend Hamed, who was the first person really from like not the United States that I ever was like in a relationship with. He had just moved here from Iran. He grew up kind of a cultural Muslim, not really religious or spiritual, but like when he moved here, like it was just a shock for me whenever I met this man. And I'm like, oh shit, you're nicer, you're more polite, you're more generous and kind and considerate and patient and genuine than any of the Christians.
Absolutely.
Not any of them, but many of the Christians that I interacted with in the church.
Yep.
And that was kind of like this eye opener for me of like, oh, he possesses like so many of the fruits of the Spirit, but we would say that he doesn't have the Spirit the way that I understand that a person could have the Spirit. And so that really became the catalyst for me to kind of start seeing other possibilities.
Yeah, I think proximity is a huge thing. I say that as I'm a white mom to a black son, right? So there's a lot of things that now raising a child that's different than me gives me proximity to pain or experience in a different way. And it's definitely that where those spiritual values kind of are formed is when you're in proximity with people who don't share the same ones that you have. So yeah, I mean, I definitely for me was going to grad school in New York City, coming from small town Alabama to kind of, it's a great place, right? But jumping to this like melting pot, this cultural center and going like, oh my gosh, like.
Did you have a moment like that or a person like that you were like, this doesn't make sense?
No, for sure. I mean, you step on the subway and you're like, oh my gosh, it's just sort of eye-opening. I do remember a shift specifically for me spiritually. Was very involved with an evangelical church, a large, well-known church in the city. And was going from where I lived at the time on the Upper East Side to church, which was in like around Union Square. So a good little ride on the subway, and jumped on the subway. And I remember I was just like hustling and bustling because I had to get to church and do my routine and do the thing. And remember like stepping over and passing by people who were in real need, you know, like people who were living on the subway or who were unhoused, right? Or who were begging for food on the subway, or noticeably dirty or smelly or whatever. But I was too busy. Like I didn't have time to interact with them because I had to get to church, right?
Behaviors were not really aligning with your values.
100%. And I was like, I'm literally stepping over these people and pushing them out of my way to get to the place that's going to tell me to take them into consideration, you know? And it was just like this eye-opening moment of like, wait, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing? Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
I had almost exact similar experience, but on the flip side, because I did not grow up religious. I grew up in the Midwest, raised on church of just be a good person and everything will be fine and get good grades and be nice. The golden rule basically was our whole household, anything. But I had a friend in middle school that was trying to convert, like trying to get me, save me or something.
They were trying to save you.
She wrote me letters and stuff. And
Benji's like, I know the protocol. We were definitely trying.
Yeah, she wrote me a lot of letters. I think I still have them, actually. I could have brought one of them. She's a very nice person. But I had the exact opposite where I said, so you're telling me my friend who is Muslim is going to hell? I don't understand. He's really nice. Like, Iqbal is a good person. His mom gives me food when I go to his house. Like, I can't understand it. And then my friend who is gay, I don't understand it. And so I had the opposite of, like, I thought that was religious people in general. So I had actually a pretty seriously negative view of religion until I moved to the South. So it was the opposite, because I mean in Chicago, and then when I moved here and worked in hospice, I saw good spirituality and good faith, and I saw people comforted by it and people showing up for dying people. And the first religious person I ever met was a chaplain who's a whiskey drinking lesbian who says fuck a lot. And so I was like, I don't understand religion at all. And so I had to have like the opposite kind of shift.
Sure.
And now I have spirituality, like a sense of spirituality, but it's not religious. But
yeah.
It's funny how you're a product of.
But I think you said something, and my husband and I were talking about this, like religious value and spiritual values to me feel different, right? Like my spiritual values shape and inform my religious value, like the places where I invest my money, spend my time, right? Want to raise my children in. So my religious values are not shaping my spiritual values. And I think, I mean, if I had to put a finger on maybe some of the problematic things that are happening on a political or social landscape, it's like those are reversed, right? Not that I have the right answer, but it does feel like actually your religious values, like what your church, what you've always been taught, what the box tells you to do, then informs how you care for human life or for the earth or for whatever.
So when you have a client come in, and we get emails all the time about like religious trauma, right? Do you see something that is almost like uniform, that it's the same, or is it really kind of like individualistic, the experiences, or are there categories, kind of buckets? You're like, oh, that's that type of religious trauma, or...
That's such a great question. I mean, I think in general, the umbrella is that there's harm being done in the name of a God or the God, right?
And what is the harm? Is it shame? Is it oppression?
So I think that's where you start seeing those like separate, for me at least. I would be so interested to hear what other people hear, but you have like the sexual harm where there's been, harm done by people of power and people of influence, right? So that shit, but then there's like abandonment, like you had a community and now they're not your community anymore because you didn't fit the mold, right? So I think it does fall into different places, but I think in general, it's just what I see a lot, especially with young people that come in with religious trauma, is they don't understand the disconnect, like you were saying, between what they see in their friends and then what they hear has to be right or wrong. And there's just a total disconnect there.
Yeah.
So,
I think that abandonment one is a big one, because I remember like coming out of my divorce, like I was a minister until like 2011, 2012, somewhere 2013 actually, and then moving back here, getting involved in a church, and then making a decision to go to a different church for various reasons. But then when that divorce happened, there was no follow up. Like it was just like I could just like.
Oh, that like that such a hot that like,
there was one guy in the church that I was kind of friends with who reached out, but like that was pretty much it.
Yeah.
And I was just like, okay, like,
so
that didn't matter.
That was the message of like
So that's most of I would say my church pain. Like that exactly for me is. Man, I mean, just this 2 weekends ago, I went to a christening at a church that I worked at for 8 years and locally, and worked with these people that I would have said, like, we were best friends. Like, we spent so much time together in these tiny offices doing life together, traveling the world together. I mean, we were super close, so intimate, right? And we would always say, sometimes in the summer, we spent more times with them than we did our own spouses and families, right? And moved away, feel like I left on good terms with the relationships that I had, and came back and went to this christening where I no longer attend this church, but I have friends obviously that are still plugged in there. And so I've been 3 or 4 times back since we've moved back. And this person that I shared an office with, for 8 years, like I have not spoken. They do not speak to me. They don't greet me. They'll look at me. They acknowledge that I'm there, but like will not speak. And it's the most painful. It is such deep hurt because it's like, I don't know, it's just this feeling like I was yours and you were mine, and all of a sudden, like, you don't even care who I am and what I do and what's going on with my family. And it's just like a break in the relationship, right? With no closure and no understanding. And there's a lot of people that come in with religious trauma, religious harm, and that's their story. And I actually think that's a form of religious trauma that's not talked about a lot. The sexual stuff really takes the primary, but there's some emotional and psychological harm that goes along with it. So
there's some abandonment of self too, pretty like fundamental to it, where you're taught that I don't know, obviously I'm like asking what religion is as if I'm an alien, but like aren't you taught in some sets of belief that you're inherently bad, and then if you're a little kid and you don't actually feel or think that you're bad, but they're telling you that you're bad. I worked with a client who said they had to do an inventory and search for what their sin or what was bad about them, and she couldn't figure out what it was.
Every camp you go to in a Christian setting.
Yeah, I was just like, she came up with gossip because she said, I like to talk about people, so I couldn't figure out anything, so I figured out that was my thing, and I was just like beating myself. Yeah, so I'm like, that's trauma. That's separating you from who you think you are by saying, you think you're good, but you're actually bad. I'm like, that's go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, like, coming from the Armenian General Baptist, like, I was raised in the General Baptist Church that even though I had made a commitment, been baptized, like I could still lose it if I wasn't good enough. There were debates in youth group of like, if you die in your sleep and you went to bed without asking God to forgive you for specific sins throughout the day, like you might not get in.
I would have been ruined. I'm so forgetful. I would have been ruined.
It was constant.
Damn it. Yeah.
It was constant anxiety. It was constant
and we
fear.
wonder why we have this wired generation, this fear-based. I remember my husband saying to me, you were asking me earlier, like, do y'all agree on everything? And I said, my husband's probably far more liberal than I am. But I remember us dating. So this is 2013. This isn't, I would say, not that long ago. And him suggesting to me, and people are probably that know me, like if they watch this, like he doesn't know if he believes in like an actual hell, right? And me being like, excuse me, like that has been the tether to right and wrong my whole life. Like, what do you mean, and now how that has shaped, like not him shaping me, but my curiosity about that, being like, oh my gosh, that is the keep you in line, that is the fear monger, right? That's the monster. Is like, you have and that's trauma. That's traumatic. That's terror. Like, I mean, we're not people that should be led by fear,
Yeah.
Right. And so now we go into the question. We've kind of fleshed it out a little bit of what do you value about your experience spiritually? How do you articulate those now?
Oh God, what a loaded question. I think I still probably am, if I'm totally honest with you, I'm still in a season of, what churchy language?
Oh, that was very.
That was so gross.
That was evangelical.
That was. Sorry about that.
I'm just in a season.
But I feel like I am still in a separation phase of that spirituality and religion, like coming into my own understanding of what my spiritual values are. I do believe that, the earth is so, it's so beyond me that I can't comprehend it not being something bigger than me, right? So I definitely would say I'm believe in God, right? And then again, that goes back to like, if I believe that I'm made in that image, that I was created in the image, then so is everyone else. And still trying to figure out, okay, so what does that mean?
So it sounds like maybe one of the values is experiencing yourself as someone who is open and curious. Yeah,
and I love, I'm befriending the part of me that is curious. Like I'm so proud of that part of me that's not been told, that's not following the instruction, that's not getting on Instagram and people are telling me this is what it is and what it has to be, that I'm okay saying like, I don't know, like I'm still figuring it out and trusting that that's okay.
One of my favorite quotes is from John Eldridge. And in one of his books, he says, let God be as original with you as he seems to be with everyone else. And so that was one of the things that I struggled with the most in figuring out what my values are, is because we're taught that it's supposed to look this certain way. And that takes, if there is a God, which is my question currently, is that if there is one, then I don't need to box it into needing to manifest or present in a certain way.
Right.
And so letting that curiosity run wild. And for me, I think my primary value that I hold to right now is more of an inspirational than a spiritual one. Because I don't even know, without a firm belief in a deity, I'm not even sure how to connect with anything spiritual to begin with, but I can be inspired. I can connect with awe and wonder. And I do that through nature. I do that through music. I do that through my children, right? Like I do that through the kind acts of people that on a day-to-day basis, I'm just like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Why would somebody be so generous? Why would, so that for me is kind of the place that I'm at with setting that value of like, I value experiencing myself as someone who is connected to awe and wonder on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And for now, that's enough. And that's been enough for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's such a beautiful place to be. I think I would say, like, I can't look at my kids. I can't hear them laugh. I can't, without feeling tethered to something like so much bigger and so much better than me and what I could imagine. And I also am okay just not knowing. I think genuinely in this work especially, but like getting the privilege to sit with people and like hear their stories and where they've been, like, what is it of me to discount that because of what I've been told is right or wrong, and I'm talking so beyond sexuality. I think a lot of times that takes the primary seat in like these conversations, but just why we do the things we do and what that was shaped by and our personal, it's just hard to, I don't know, to come in boxed up and these are the yeses and these are the nos when you get to hear these really abstract, beautiful stories. And so I don't know. I think I'm okay with not knowing. I think I'm okay with not ever knowing.
Yeah.
And I feel like, honestly, like, I don't want to believe in a scary, terrifying God. I just don't. It's not good for my own mental health, but I don't want my kids. I just don't want that. And so I think that probably shapes kind of how I'm moving through the world. But back to that XY axis, like, I feel like my spiritual values are just evolving. I don't know that I've given you a concrete answer as to what they are, because that
you are. So you value flexibility. You value experiencing yourself with someone who it can explore, be curious, and malleable to the experiences and the information that you're getting. I think that is an important
Yeah.
value that and I think it's a very valid
Yeah.
value. And then the investment strategies or the, whatever shape that takes on that other axis of where your behavior meets your values, like that's so individualized. And unfortunately, I don't think we have enough time.
No,
I think we need
totally.
to do a part 2, obviously.
Yeah, for sure.
Of this conversation for sure. So
I think it goes back, and I would also, I'd love to hear your perspective. We can do this on part 2. But when people talk about like having a biblical worldview, right? Specifically, when people are determining their spiritual values, a lot of people will use like the thing that orients them is the Bible, right? I will say that's probably never been the thing for me. One, because like I'm not super great. Like my brain maps show I'm not great at with reading comprehension. Like I didn't understand it a lot of times, right? But I think there was a realization in me that like that was formed on councils by people and people of power and people of influence. And if I could say anything about my spiritual values, wrap it up, is like it's no longer informed by those things. The people that with power, the people that know all the yeses, that have the wealth and the opportunity and the influence no longer shape that spiritual value. Like I'm allowing that to be an individual experience, right? Rather than this is what the important people tell me I'm supposed to know, right? They don't get to decide for me. So
I think it's still relational though. It sounds like before it was relational, the relation was the power, like they told you, but now the way you're describing it, it still sounds to me like it's about being curious and being open, and you're curious in relationship with other people.
Yeah.
And so finding like space to explore that with other people who are curious so that it can learn and you can learn from each other, and even just
other people that are
experiences
curious, though, is the thing, right? It can't be other people like that.
This is the way you need to be.
Yeah, for sure.
Love it.
Yeah. Well, let's do a part 2.
I have so many more questions for you.
Yeah.
I have questions too, so let's do it. Yeah.
All right. Well,
cool.
Let's get it on the books.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's do it. Absolutely.
Thanks,
Hey.